Hello, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce the Norwegian Minister of Education and Integration, Tonje Brenna. She's a member of the Labour Party and has proven a strong engagement for a common, open, free school for all, regardless of background, a school that fosters democracy, but is also a part of a social democracy, which raises a broad spectrum of value dilemmas as well. We are so pleased to have you with us today, and we forgive you that you have to leave after your speech. It's a lot to do in this place in Arendal. Vær så god.
Well, thank you, dear everyone, dear everybody also in cyberspace. We know you are with us. Thank you so much for the invitation and for raising the important questions on education, democracy, and human rights. And a special thank you to Anna and Krzysztof for being here today. And to Anna, we are devastated, all Norwegians are devastated by the war in Ukraine, and I wish to express our support for your people and for your ongoing effort to repel the invasion. A democracy is not automatically solid or durable. Our democracies requires maintenance. We have to constantly strengthen them, build them, and rebuild them. So, what role does our school play in promoting, strengthening, and developing our democracies today? How do we prepare our children to stand up for democracy, and how do we prepare them to recognize when it's threatened? First, democratic values have to be something we teach our children all through school. Second, schools must teach and demonstrate active citizenships. Third, pupils should feel like they belong in school, regardless of their background, their skills, and their mindsets. Well, first things first. We must give pupils an understanding of the basic rules of democracy and also the importance of protecting them. The Norwegian core curriculum states that pupils shall learn to understand how democracies work. Both the Education Act and our curriculum focuses on democratic values our schools promote. Values such as respect for human life, solidarity, equality, and freedom of speech. In Norway, we have 3 interdisciplinary topics, and one of them is democracy and citizenships. These topics are taught across subjects. The goal is that pupils shall gain insight into challenges and dilemmas in these topics and into how they are relevant across several different subjects. Democracy is not only about the rights of the individual and the opportunities of the majority. Democracy is also about protecting the minority. Schools should be a strong counterweight to prejudice and discrimination and help create respect for diversity. Critical thinking is crucial, especially in the times we now live in, and it's crucial to democracy. Therefore, an essential part of our children's education is also critical thinking. They need to learn how to navigate in the jungle of information that exists today with deep fakes, fake news, and misinformation. Second, we also need to teach our children to be active participants in our democracies. We have to teach them how they can get involved in their local communities and how they can influence those who make decisions on their behalf. Schools must demonstrate participation, and pupils should be involved in decision-making. Schools have to show our children that their opinion matters. Participation has a value in the here and now, but also prepares the pupils for becoming responsible and active citizens in the future. Being an involved citizen is something that you must be taught, that you must experience, and you have to practice it. And our schools should do all 3 things. Third, education is the key to work and active participation in society. Therefore, it's crucial that everyone experiences that they belong in school. Schools need to demonstrate that all children has value, despite different backgrounds, talents, and ambitions. I am a strong believer in schools that welcomes and encourages pupils with different mindsets and skills. A school that offers them varied ways of how to learn, so that they are all given an opportunity to develop and to flourish. If schools can strengthen and support all pupils and give them a sense of belonging, this is valuable, of course, to the individual, but it's also a way of protecting our democracies and protecting it from future attacks. Our schools cannot solve all the problems in society, but many of the challenges our societies face are also expressed in our classrooms. Our children and youth enter our schools with different social backgrounds and experiences. We must make sure that they all have a chance to succeed. This is important for every child, but it's also important for the future of our democracy. Thank you.
Please, if you can. Thank you, Minister, and thank you for reminding us the importance of education for democratic citizenship. And not just learn it, we need to practice, and they need to experience till in school every day. So I would like to introduce the participants. First, and I will take another microphone. So we are very happy to bring you here some long-standing partners who have traveled all the way to come to this session today. So Anna Novosad, here in the middle, she is an Ukrainian educational activist. Previously, she held a number of positions, being the Minister of Education of Ukraine during the Zelensky government until 2020. You have been working in educational reform for many, many years, and currently you are leading a number of projects connected to access to education, rebuilding in schools in the northern part of Ukraine. Krzysztof Stanovsky, also a long-standing partner, he's currently working in the city of Lublin, which is very close to the Ukrainian and Belarusian border. So we will talk about the situation there as well. Krzysztof was also Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs or Deputy Minister of Education of Poland in the previous government, and also the director of the Solidarity Fund, which is NURAD in Poland. But you have been an activist your whole life, working in most of Eastern Europe, Russia, Asia, and so on, and a very good friend of Ukraine, working in Crimea for decades. Helena Shegesta, I'm really happy that you decided to accept our invitation, because you have been correspondent from Aftenposten in Moscow from 19 to 21. So you have been reporting on a number of issues, very much on schools as well. And you won an international prize for your reporting from Russia. So we wanted to have you here to tell us how you saw the last years in the country. With this introduction, I would like to start with the first question for Anna Novosad. Because after Maidan in 2014, Ukraine entered into a number of reforms in a number of areas, but the education field was very prominent, starting with higher education, primary education. Why was education so important for you at that time?
Thank you very much, Anna. And first of all, greetings to everyone who came here to listen to us. And I do want to use this platform to say wholehearted thank you to all people of Norway. Without exaggeration, your support is felt in Ukraine. Your support is very, very important for us. And you've been one of those, not few, but still one of those countries that have been very unequivocal in support to us and in your stand of calling this war a war, not a conflict, not a violence on the border, but a civilizational war of Russia against not only Ukraine, but of all the liberal, democratic world. To answer your question, Anna, 2014 in general has been one of the milestones of our fight for our democracy. It happened when our back then president decided to give a slap to the whole society and say, no, you're not going to the EU, we'll stay with Russia, we will stay in Russian neighborhood. And the whole society said no, and that started with the students. And I've been back then just a freshly graduate master student, and all the students came immediately to Maidan, to the main square, to say no, we are going to the EU because that's been our choice. And that evolved in the full-scale revolution for our right to choose, and the right to choose a democratic future, not autocratic or totalitarian past with Russia. And so when the Revolution of Dignity won on the very next day, I was happy and lucky enough to join the Ministry of Education. And education reform started to be one of the key systemic reforms after Maidan. And one of the reasons why that happened is because students demanded that. Students who have been on the square from the day one have been demanding trusted, reputable minister, free higher education, not corrupted higher education, and that's been their demand. And they actually occupied even the Ministry of Education, demanded that. And they opened the gate only when the proper minister was appointed. So for us, it was, first of all, a demand of the society, but also we understood that without this fundamental element, we're not gonna move forward, right? So starting with higher education, because there was a political momentum for that and ready laws, we then proceeded with the school education reform that was called the New Ukrainian School Reform, and that you might not know, but Norway has been a big part of it, because specifically Norway contributed a lot with your expertise, also your funds, just to emphasize the importance of how your taxes have been properly used. You've been a huge supporter of the democratic education and civic education within the New Ukrainian School Reform. Thanks to Norway, via the European Vigilance Center, we managed to introduce it with your help to our curriculum and make it one of the cores of our new school education.
Thank you so much. Is this on? It's working? Okay. The topic of the conference or the panel debate is education as a tool to make or break democracy. And it was vital for us to try to go beneath the rhetoric of politicians, maybe sometimes, and to understand that it's this dilemma between how you can use education. And to try to understand the past, education, as we have heard, has been used by authoritarian leaders to oppose values of human rights and democracy. And the Russian education minister, Sergei Kravtsov, has described schools as central to Moscow's fight to win the information and psychological war against the West. And I would like to ask you, Helena, who's been working for this for many, many years, what can you tell us about how education in Russia has changed over the past years? How have educational policies and official narratives influenced Russian children and teenagers since the early 2020s?
Big questions. Yeah. One of the most striking features I experienced by living in Russia is that there are a lot of pretty words and pretty documents and pretty stamps, but underneath the surface, not much is happening. By the words of Chernomurdin, former Prime Minister, хотели как лучше, получилось как всегда. We wanted better, got the same. That was kind of what happened in the first and also half of the second decade after the fall of the Soviet Union. You had many promises of reforms, but basically it was looking like Soviet Union. And then we have 3 big curriculum reforms in Russia, 2004, mostly like focused on topics, how to do well in different topics. And then we have the second one, 2010, and that's when we start seeing what is to come. A lot more outcome focused. What kind of person will leave this school? It will be a patriotic person. It will be a person that has a specific understanding of history. That and it also, I would say it's even more now. It has just accelerated this development, and also there's a new curriculum reform. It's coming into play in just a couple of weeks, I think. That is even worse. It's patriotism, it's Russian culture, Russian history, and Stalin which can be weird to hear, but I've been to a number of demonstrations where Stalin is put forward as the #1 hero. It's a specific understanding of World War II, and it's also a degrading of the 90s, which was indeed chaotic, but also had some liberal ideas. And it's, of course, a great stand against all that is Western on the expense of family values, which for us can be a bit foreign, I would say. So we have had these number of reforms that have like accelerated a development towards total control of school, I would say. The teaching material mostly and is provided by a personal friend of Vladimir Putin, and it all has to fall in line with the official line of what especially history is. Was that a short answer to a big question?
And if I may, also, you mentioned this specific understanding or a very Russian view of the Second World War. There is a law from 2012 that established that the Second World War started in 1941, when the Hitler army entered Russia. So they forget the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, where Russians invaded the Baltics and part of Poland. And every attempt to say that it's different is, of course, fully punished, as an example. But now I want to move to Poland, because we have been working for many years in Eastern European countries, and every time we come and it says we are working with Poland, well, that was before 16, they were really looking up. Poland was the icon, was the country that made it most successful and so on. So it's not a linear development, and we come back to that. But I didn't say, but Christoph was very active in Solidarity, of course, and he was a political prisoner as well. He once told me that while you were in the underground, you were working already in the educational reform of the country before Solidarity came into power. Why?
It's quite simple. It was the moment when we Poles used to be the world champions. Not on hockey, not on football. We're the world champions on strikes, on protests. It was before Tahrir, it was before Maidan. We were the best. We could easily bring together 100 people on one square saying, we are against. And suddenly, somewhere in the 80s, we understood that perhaps they will leave. And it will be nobody against whom we can protest. And our great skills to go on the square and say, we disagree with you, will be unuseful. And that means that at that moment we started to think what we want, not whom we don't want, what country would like to see. And civic education for me, it's not how many chairs you have in parliament, how to become president, or all this kind of stuff. It is how to take responsibility for yourself, for your family, for your village, for the city, for the region, finally, for the country. We're not thinking about European Union at that moment. And that means that we started planning reforms in jails. Not the day after, 5 years in advance. Not having a dream about implementation. And it was really important to understand that we would like to decide about that, and we would like to discuss that at the moment when there is time for discussion. So, decentralization reform and educational reform, I was part of the team who was working partially on that, was discussed by the people before any opportunities to implement. And then when we succeed in elections, what means succeed in elections? These elections were 3 in 35%. All the rest of seats were taken by the Communist Party. But we won everything what we could. And months later, we formed the government. And the first most important reform, the economical reform, macroeconomical reform, was implemented 90 days after forming first government. And decentralization reform, empowering local communities, was implemented 180 days after forming first government. That means that we gave power to the communities. Using the language from Ukraine, we captured the Maidan, but then we immediately moved to small communities to make a change. And the next decision was to give education to the responsibility of local communities. Many people were saying, you are crazy. You want peasants to be responsible for the education? But they were not understanding that this is not the partisan issue. In small community, this is about my son, the daughter of my neighbor, and the son of our neighbor. And in these small communities, they were spending up to 80% for education, understanding that this is the choice between unemployment and education. And the first civic education course was financed by the local governments. It wasn't implemented through curricula. It was implemented by the local mayors, local community councils, understanding that this is about them. In result, if you see the PISA results, 30 years ago, Poland was in the middle of Africa. Extremely good education for few and very poor for majority. Today, after 25 years, we came to the 4th place in Europe, 10th place worldwide. How? In what way? Through decentralization, through empowering local communities. Saying frankly, from time to time, we believe that to build the state is not military exercise. It's not economical exercise. Mainly, it's educational exercise. And if you will not do that, you can fail regardless how strong you are.
Thank you. Besides being the chair of the board of the Wergeland Center, I'm a professor of philosophy at the Department of Education at the University of Oslo, and we do research on many of these things, and educating democracy is really complex issue. And we see that, in a way, we could see that we have failed, that right-wing totalitarian development is all over Europe. And what you're talking about is like John Dewey's famous words that democracy is about practice, it's about culture. It is also about representativity or balance on power, institutions and so on, but it's about creating cultures. And we've seen from some research in Norway that even though the aim of the curriculum is trying to strengthen this culture, and to try to see that children will make a change. When it comes down to the exact curriculum, it's more individualized and it's more schoolish. They feel that they have to pass exams so they just do what they're told or read and repeat. So it's really a challenge. Many years ago, I went to a university in Deutschland, in Germany, and they said that our education for lawyers, it's a vomiting up. It's just a vomiting up. You just say what you are told to say. So how do you when you talk now about this implementation, as you say, what do you think we could learn from the Polish history or situation as you described it?
We have crisis situation now. We have again the government which is trying to decentralize also the educational system. I believe that the most important is the culture in the school. School is the first public institution which youngsters are meeting. And I remember also from Germany the case when on very early stage we met some partners from Germany and they were teachers of Marxism and Stalinism, who suddenly became in trouble. The subject was cancelled, and they came and said, passed the message, hey guys, we are professionals, give us new curriculum, we will do that. We are professionals. No, it's not about that. It's about culture of school. It's about student self-government. It's about parent councils. It's about also, is the law effective when we are talking about school community? Are students equal? This is why today, in this crisis, this is so crucial for us to bring Ukrainian students into the classroom, to bring Ukrainian teachers, to make them equal and to understand that they are just new inhabitants.
Anna, we just heard Minister Brenna talk about values that underpin the Norwegian education system and the new curriculum, Fagfornyelsen, which is about democratic citizenship. And you mentioned that Norway was one of the few countries supporting education, and particularly education for democracy in Ukraine, something you were very grateful for. And you also came to Norway in November 2019 for a study trip. What did you see in Norwegian education, and what did you take with you?
Well, the purpose of that trip was mostly focused on the kindergartens because, to be honest, you have, I think, the best preschool system in the world. It's amazing how you make your kids feel free in this world, you know, feel kind of agentified in this world from the very, very early ages. And I do believe that this is something that we have to take and learn from you. Unfortunately, we didn't have a political momentum to fully develop and implement the preschool reform. There was the government change, and then the war started. So unfortunately, right now, it's not the best time to start the new reforms. But the new Ukrainian school reform, the general secondary education school reform that was launched in 2016, is also very, very much based on the civic education values and democratic education values in general. And as Krzysztof mentioned, Ukrainian education very much now depends on the decentralization reform. This is something that we took and learned from our Polish neighbors, and took from the Polish example that if you want to succeed, especially in huge countries like ours, right? We're not Estonia, right, that has 500 schools. In Ukraine, we have 15,000 schools, at least we had before the war. We had 25 regions, and you cannot govern all that sitting in Kyiv in the Ministry of Education. You have to give power to the ground, you have to decentralize authorities, and you have to empower people so that they are responsible for their schools. So for us, that was one of the aims of our education reform when we passed the law on education, is to make schools responsible for what they do, make them free, but also make them accountable, right? By giving them freedom of pedagogy, by giving them a choice to choose the programs, then also contribute to the program's development. It's not only the ministry who has to sit in Kyiv and decide, oh, we're going to have this curriculum, this program, this textbook, please take it and teach your children. No, you have to be co-participant of that process. And we try to empower teachers. And I think this is exactly where European Background Center was a great partner in, you know, making teachers feel that they are owners of that process, but also equipping them with very concrete instruments on how to deliver on that. But now we have a, unfortunately, totally different situation after Russia started the full-scale war. And it's not the start of the war, because the war started in 2014 when they, on the 1st of March, attacked and annexed Crimea and attacked Donbass. So we've been having war for all these 8 years, and 24th of February was a sort of full-scale invasion to our country. And you know, it's basically a new page of our history when our kids, want or not, they have to be leaders of their communities and of their schools. So it's basically they have to learn this democracy and civic education as they live and as they go, because these kids, these schools, these communities will be responsible for their rebuilding when the war is over. the government will not be able to help everyone immediately, so everyone would have to make their own contribution to the restoration effort of our country. And just to add on this, I do believe that we hold on the way we do right now, is especially because we had this decentralization and we had empowered the cities, empowered the communities to be responsible for their own living, to have funds, to be free to use the budget, to have authority and responsibility. And this is exactly what helped us in this invasion, because it was not Kyiv and the government in Kyiv who was, fighting in Chernihiv or Mykolaiv or Zaporizhia, right? These were the communities and the mayors of these communities who have a huge support. So, I think we are sort of like going through a very, very express course on democratic education and civic education due to this war. But what we totally believe in is that this is our only path. Without institutionalized democracy and understanding of how the society should work in democratic country, we will not move forward after the war is over. So this is, there is no way back for us. This is only path that we're gonna walk further.
I would like to ask you, come back to you, Helena, because Tonje Brenna said that the importance in Norway of teaching critical thinking. We are hearing from Christoph and from Anna the same. This is our kids thinking from themselves and so on. You visited a number of Russian schools lately when you were there. What is the culture there? What is the Unarmi? Tell us about that.
Unarmi, yes. Well, two things have been said here that I think is spot on when it comes to Russia is read and repeat and vomit. And what you, not like literally, but when you just say what you have been taught. And I visited a school in, I think it was 2020 or 2019, I'm not sure, where two generals were walking the halls and recruiting children between 8 and 12 to Unarmia. Unarmia is basically an organization that trains children for war. It's funded by the Ministry of Defense. It was an idea of Sergei Shoigu and Putin themselves. And the pupils were taught, were asked to come to a rehearsal at 2 that day, or they were told to come, and they came, and for 2 hours they learned how to march, to do like things they do in the army, tried on uniforms, got pictures of guns. It was very militarized. I just can't imagine generals walking the halls in any other country I have visited. So, and also when you see now stories from Russia, I haven't been there in a while because I had a child. But we see the pictures, and my colleagues, they report when they see pictures from schools today, you see the Unarmia uniform on a lot of children is beige and it has a red hat. And if they have this concept of desk of heroes, which is if there's somebody at the school that lost their lives in the war, they will put up a desk and honor this person. And there's always people from Unarmia standing in the back. And you don't have to know a lot about history to remember Komsomol and other organizations that have been training young children from a very early age to become the citizen they want. And I just got a picture from the kindergarten where my son attended, and it had big sets written on every window, kindergarten. And he was also told to draw tanks, which he colored pink, which made me happy. But yeah, it starts from an early age. And I must also say be a bit self-critical, because I thought this was only like rewriting the history bit by bit about World War II. It's not my favorite subject. I was writing about it because it caused tension, but I didn't understand at that time that this was the method to implement a thought that, or a plan that Ukraine was not a country anymore. It's the same method, it's the same tool that they used on rewriting World War II, like the rewriting history right now. And it's a very, very powerful tool. And I don't think we grasped the severity when we saw it happen until it was too late.
We see this warfare semantics other places in the world as well, and the prefixes pro and anti, as we see in Russia, as you said just now. And I just wanted to ask you, how deep do you think this is? Is there any, how is it possible for Russian teachers to oppose, for instance?
I would want to say, when I mentioned the earlier reforms, there was an outcry of criticism in 2010, also in 2014, and all the way up to I left Russia. It was no problem getting critical voices to voice their opinions. Now, the critical voices are exiled or anonymous. We are treating Russia like we're treating China, because we don't want to put people at risk. So teachers, which have been one of the most vocal opponents to Vladimir Putin and have voiced that for many, many years, are now choosing to be anonymous because they don't know where the chips may fall. We don't know how strict they will, like, if you call it a war, you can get 15 years in prison. We don't know how they will act on this. So in their protection, and I also think it's a good choice, a tragic choice, of course, but to be more cautious.
And we also see the critique on liberal arts education. We talked about critical thinking, which could mean a lot of things, but it could be connected to liberal arts, and we see that history is more legitimized because it's the past, but critical thinking towards the future or the current society is dangerous or expelled from curriculum.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anna, I would like to get back to you. You wrote recently, I cannot imagine a successful society without good education. In its attempt to take Chernihiv city, north of Kiev, the Russian army targeted education. 27 out of 34 schools are very damaged. 2 are down to ashes. Unfortunately, this is not the only case in war zones, but why do you think that educational institutions and cultural institutions are particularly targeted? And what is happening in schools in the occupied areas?
Yeah, I think Russians are very, very good at understanding how crucial is education. It's like Hitler in 30s. They understand that if you conquer education, you're gonna do very easily the rest. So as in Russia, as it was just said, what they do with curriculum, with teachers, with letter Z of this new swastika of their war being present everywhere, the same thing they do in Ukraine. After taking over cities, which they managed to capture and occupy, they bring back, for instance, statues of Lenin that we decommunized years and years ago and took them all down. They bring them back. Like, what has to be in the head of a man, right? If the second thing that he does, occupying the city, is to bring back the statue of Lenin. They are specifically targeting the schools, so it's aviastrikes, bombs, artillery, because on the one hand they think that this is where our troops are, but on the other hand they understand that if we have no schools, there will be no education process, right? In the occupied territories, in the south, in the east, they terrorize the teachers. So the majority of our teachers, they're either staying at home afraid to leave their apartments, so they cannot physically leave from there anywhere, or they are taken down to basements and tortured. Russians are bringing their own teachers to the occupied territories to teach their own Russian program as of 1st of September, and they are promising to pay them $3,000 per month. It's a huge amount of funds, both in Russia and in Ukraine. So they are treating it as a very important tool for propaganda. And we saw that it works in the occupied territories of Donbass in the east, because they've been occupied for 8 years, and it does work. We have a generation that has been out of Ukrainian context for years, and these are just zombie people. It will be very, very hard to get them back. So I just, this is such a vivid example of how we all the collective West, because I also think that we are by our spirit, very Western nation, valuing democracy, how dormant, right, and sleepy we have been with regard to what's happening in Russia and in other countries in their education system for years, and what impact it can have. Because now all these teachers and kids, they think that the war they are having in Ukraine is actually legit and is actually the right way to do, because they've been told, like German people have been told in 30s that you have to hate the Jews because they are guilty of something else. This is the history repeating itself. No one can rationally explain why a Russian has to kill Ukrainian, but they do, right? And so I'm helping Kyiv region and Chernihiv region to restore access to education, to rebuild the schools, because as Joanna said, they've been specifically targeting the schools, especially in Chernihiv. So they've been avia bombing the schools, like specifically targeting the premises. So 27 out of 34 are gone. And in one of the schools in Kyiv region that was not bombed, but was under occupation, that school served as the basically like a commanding point of the Battle of Kyiv. The Russian commander was there. There was everything: a bunker dug in the schoolyard, even a mobile crematorium in that school. And the principal told me that apart, obviously, of stealing everything that they could when they were retrieving. When they occupied the school, they for some reason took down all the portraits of our historic figures that are typically around the school, like our historic figures, writers, so on and so forth, and put on portraits of Lenin. And I'm like thinking, like, what has to be in heads of these people that when they are going to a war in a different country, in their tanks, they're also bringing portraits of Lenin to hang them in the school. Right? It's just that that's something that I'm pretty sure, like you and me, we don't get it, right? But for them, it's a very, very well thought element of propaganda. So I just think that we all have to wake up and be very, very vigilant. Russia has been in its accession way to OECD, right? It's been participating in PISA. I never saw one single report of OECD researching on what's going on in Russian education, how propagandic it gets, how hatred-based it gets towards not only Ukrainians, primarily against Ukrainians, but Poles, Baltic states, other countries that constitute Russia itself. I never saw that happening, right, in academia. And my question is why? And it's not only happening in Russia, China, and other countries. So I just think that while advocating our democratic education, civic education, we have to be more assertive. They are aggressive. We have to be more assertive in the way that we advocate our worldview through education.
And in a couple of weeks, you will be starting the school year. What are the plans for that?
First of all, to survive. So our critical point is to do the bomb shelters. It's a new normal for us. This is the only thing that everyone is not preoccupied with, because we understand that missile attacks are not going away. I'm sitting here and I'm just checking my phone, and like every 20 minutes we have air raid siren on off, and it's just never. And it means like in 15 minutes the missile will land somewhere, and we understand that it's not going to stop until they use the very last missile, and they will target specifically schools. We are sure about that because they want to do a civic terror. So bomb shelters is a critical issue number one. We don't want our kids to be only studying at school. We had 2 years of COVID and now staying for God knows how many years home because of the war is not the way we want the school process to be. So blended learning will most probably be the way to go. So the security, but also access to gadgets and to digital education is the primary focus right now. No one knows exactly how it's going to go. Probably in different regions it will be different. So in the West, they will have more chance to go offline to schools, but in the East and especially in Kyiv, probably there will be more of a hybrid regime.
Krzysztof, the current government in Poland had done a number of interesting reforms, judiciary among others, and very heavily criticized in Europe and in Norway. And here we often get a very dark picture of things going on in Poland, and Poland is having a really going backwards concerning democracy. 6 months ago, you got the refugee crisis and you received millions of Ukrainians. And we also saw kind of tension between what's going on at the central level and what's going on at the local level. How is, from your perspective, is everything that negative in Poland, or is less of a white and black picture of reality?
We also used to criticize these case reforms and saying frankly, just example of my city, yes, it was proposal on the city council, proposed to establish 3 LGBT plus zone. And of course, city council rejected this crazy, outrageous proposal. Quite often we see the situation that the point of view of local government is totally different than national government. And just imagine that politically, in none of the big cities, the government has a political majority. What that means in practice? In practice, we are relatively decentralized, especially in education. So we local governments have something to say, and just imagine current crisis. We have situation that just in Lublin is a city of 340,000 inhabitants. We have 70,000 refugees. 70,000 refugees. And of course, the first issue, and we are alone. That means the state who is responsible for refugees in theory or in constitution, they are doing not so much, but these are just neighbors arriving, and through Lublin went 1.3 million of refugees, and 70,000 are more or less permanently with us. And the first issue is, of course, is a shelter, is a place to live. We created the civic committee to aid Ukraine 5 hours after first bombs. At 10 a.m. on the 24th, people came together to find solution, to start infoline, to think about legal advice, to think about shelters, to think about medical aid. We started that immediately. Just imagine, in first week we have 460 interpreters speaking Ukrainian and few thousand volunteers. In result, 97% of refugees stayed at private homes. These are not homes of the prime minister and president and so on. These are normal inhabitants of Lublin who welcome that, not to spare flats, not to additional houses. They don't have additional houses. They welcome them just at home. And many people stay for months there. Education. Definitely, education is extremely important. That's true. Ukraine has quite well developed distance education. At the same moment, we welcome refugee students to join to our schools. The government is proposing the separate classrooms. We in the city, as many majority of the local governments, we invite them to the integrated classrooms. And immediately, we employed 50 Ukrainian teachers to our schools just in Lublin. In March, we employed 50 teachers to assist parents, to assist Polish teachers, to assist Polish Ukrainian children to be together. Thanks God, we developed the law which was welcoming foreign students to Polish schools when I was in the Ministry of Education 15 years ago. And that means that the next question immediately when they are in schools, how to find the books. You can buy a toy. Yeah, you go to the shop and you can buy the same toy on Disney model, but suddenly we understood that we need Ukrainian books and we started to print them. There's a few examples. The books, we got the copyright from the Ukrainian publishers. We found NGO which started to print them legally in Poland. We got master copies, copyrights, and we do that. So suddenly in the library, in the community where there never were so many Ukrainians. You can find Ukrainian books, both contemporary literature as something historical. You can find them at school. And what's most important, our mayor is saying they will change and we will change. We started to teach Ukrainian, Polish teachers, Polish officials, and we organized very intensive courses of Ukrainian language. That means that we cannot give up too much power to the government. I know that it's strange in Norway. We don't trust the government to the level to allow them to decide about everything. This is our community. These are our neighbors. And we should ensure that they feel in our city as just new inhabitants, who they are.
A crucial aspect of democracy is to listening to each other and to give people an opportunity to ask questions. And we will, of course, open for questions today from you in the audience or from you in cyberspace. And we will end with a round for all the audience, the participants here in the panel in the end. So you have the opportunity now to ask questions or to just make some reflections on what you've heard so far.
Good.
My name is Birgit Philipsen from Adra, Norway. We are working a lot with the situation in Ukraine. And I would just like to know a little bit more. I mean, I was very impressed about what you said about the threats to democracy in the schools. I would like to know a little bit more about how you see that agencies from outside, from Norway, for example, how can we support you from now and in the future in maybe rebuilding, in helping to stand up against this development that you are afraid may happen?
Thank you very much for your question. Currently for us, of course, the issue and the necessity number one are weapons. We have to fight for our existence with weapons, right? And so this is something that Ukraine conveys to everyone. However, we also have to think what comes next after we win. So development is already on the agenda, and it has to. I mean, we have to start having that conversation now. And I'm totally convinced that rebuilding and building back better our education is our core task together with the partners. So on the one hand, we now see that all these big donor organizations are coming to Ukraine, UNICEF, Save the Children, these large donors. But to be honest, regular Ukrainians like me, we don't really see them on the ground. But what we see more, so to say, are smaller initiatives that work locally with local partners, like Wegeland Center, like Finnish embassy that is very small, but has very small grants, but is there with their help in a week time after announcing a grant, not in 2 years with a couple of millions, but quickly with smaller help, but that still comes faster. For us, time is crucial. The only thing we are of dire need of is time. So whatever is faster, I think works better for us. So just answer your question. While the government think how to help in mass to the government, to our government, to provide us the budget support, I think what is crucial is to forge these bonds between the schools, between the communities to make this small initiative, to start smaller, but it proves to be more effective. So I would love to see Norway supporting Vigeland Center to be present there wider in Ukraine, supporting the network of schools that it's been working on. I would love to see the Association of Norwegian how do you call it? Municipalities. Thank you very much. Municipalities working directly with their counterparts in Ukraine, helping to rebuild. And we are not only talking about financial assistance, right? But for instance, in Chernihiv city that I worked with, so Russians bombed completely to the ashes 2 schools. We are now building back 1, but we don't. You know, it's easier to build back walls. But what is the new sense that we want to put in that school, right? And so this is exactly that we can work together with partners from Norway, right? On the soft measures, training to teachers, psychological support, connections between students. So I think anything that starts on the local level is of worth. And I think that not only millions and billions of funds are making change. I think this people-to-people connection that we can try to establish because of this war could really make a change for us.
And just to tell you, because we have mentioned the activities of the center, we have been working in Ukraine for 10 years with the Ministry of Education, and we have a network of 600 schools and 100,000 teachers that have gone through our programs. So we know very active during the last 6 months, and we know what teachers need. They need a lot of support. They need materials. They need gadgets in order to be able to do online learning. And they did a lot of support concerning how to support children who are traumatized. We are talking about 90% of children in Ukraine, about 6 million traumatized by the war. So we need to support teachers on how they can deal with that from September 1st.
Let me add one element. As for now, in Norway, you have 25,000-30,000 refugees from Ukraine. Many of them are teachers. Some of them will be ready to go back. How you will equip them? And I'm not talking about the money. Traditionally, when we are thinking about refugees and they go back, we forget them. Perhaps it's a mistake. Perhaps the community they lived for half a year, for 1 year, should continue this contact. Perhaps the classrooms, the schools should cooperate. Perhaps you can find a way to make them ambassadors, and not only on the individual level, but to do that on behalf of the community and on behalf of the Norwegian state. It would be really new quality of thinking about what's happening when refugees are coming back home.
My name is Elietta Tsakula. I work for the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities, which is the Norwegian KS, kommunenes organisasjon. And we have been working in Ukraine and Poland for many years with our counterparts there. And now we are planning actually to set municipality-to-municipality contacts between Norwegian and Ukrainian municipalities. So it was very good for me to hear importance that you give to the decentralization and actually to also supporting further the decentralization. But what would be what would you give as an advice, the message to Norwegian mayors when we start this recruitment process to establish cooperation with Ukrainian local governments? To all panelists, I would like to hear your good advice on the main message.
For me, it's hard to answer it because I'm not a mayor. I do not represent a local authority. However, I think it's important to understand what's the strengths of particular community, right? What could be the biggest value that you can convey? If this is education and you have, I don't know, for instance, a strong teacher training institute or a strong school that has been active in international cooperation, and that could help one of the schools in twinning projects and setting up something between the students in a school, I think that will be really the way to go. So I think Norwegian municipalities, authorities would have to understand what is their strengths that they could share with the Ukrainian counterparts.
In Poland, we call it solidarity. Yeah. Solidarity is concept that person you never met before is as important as your wife, as your family. And this is not about Norwegian minority in Ukraine. This is just about people you never met. And this is the way we talk with the mayors. So somehow this is our obligation. On the other hand, and it's definitely very true in Norway. Norway is changing. Norway is not used to be so rich in the past. I learned something very important when I was jailed for the underground solidarity. And I was approached by most important bandit in the jail. He put his hand on my shoulder, wor w zakonie, złodziej w zakonie, and he said, Mr. Stanowski, first 10 years are most difficult. And definitely, when you are talking about building again Ukraine from this difficult situation, first 10 years are most difficult, and it would be fair if Norwegian mayors would be there, and you can learn a lot from mayors from Ukraine and from society in Ukraine. Thank you.
One last question. There's one from outer space, or from cyberspace. Many thanks from Georgia for this extremely interesting discussion. So it's thank you. Wonderful. I think we will now go towards the closing of the panel.
I have one question for you, Helena,
Yes.
again. We are following what's going on in Russia because we have been working there for a while. We just published yesterday an interview with one of our people that had to flee to Georgia because they were very outspoken, and they mentioned the war as a war. There are some reports which are very scary, I would say, coming from what's going on in Russia, both at the school level but also at university level, where there are proposals for master's students to take courses in hybrid warfare, propaganda, as a course. But also something else happened in July. There was a new law, 14th of July, signed by the president, creating an all-Russian association for children from 6 years to university, in order to have the right values in place. And the president of this foundation is the president. What means this for the future?
Well, when we spoke prior to this panel, you asked me if there's any hope, and I was quite dark, I think. And this doesn't help and brighten the future for Russia. I think a lot of people ask me, how bad can it get in Russia? And this is a good example. And I say, look to history. How bad can it get? It's sprinting into totalitarianism, to dictatorship right now. And if you have every child by the age of 6 repeating what one man wants it to repeat, and will sanction it if you don't, you can only imagine where this is heading. But I also managed to think about something positive, if you're going to ask me about that afterwards. But but right now, of course, this doesn't help at all. It will probably work together with Unarmia in creating and forming the mindset of very, very young children in Russia.
So, this one more.
This is a question for you coming again from online. What can be done to unbreak democracy in Russia? Oh, this is a big one, yeah. Unbreak.
I was supposed to be here as a journalist, but yeah, no, it's of course a very big question. But if you're asking me what can be done to change the development in Russia, I would say there has always been and there is oppositional voices in Russia right now. They are by themselves holding tiny posters, standing alone on the streets, being arrested, put into jail for many years. And right now we are, of course, looking other places, and we are forgetting that Russians are not Vladimir Putin. They are individuals, and even though they have been put into a system, a lot of them are still willing to have a different opinion, and they are probably the bravest people I know. If they can get in touch with the youth in Russia right now, because the propaganda from Kremlin does not have the same effect on the younger generation as it has on the elderly because of the internet. This is an internet generation. They have lived for many years traveling, watching the whole world. They don't want to live in a dictatorship. But I think they need to feel the hardship, economical hardship, before it turns into something more. I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm not an expert. But as long as they have their iPhone and their daily lives, I think we will not see a big revolt. But if we just have to see if these two forces of change can find each other, and maybe there's also hope for our big neighbor and the democracy.
Thank
And
you
they
so
have to
much.
stop the war, of
Yes.
course.
When we planned this panel, we agreed on trying to end with a more positive perspective, and you started, Helena. So I want to ask you, from an educational perspective, how do you see the future? Is it only dark? What can we do to ensure that European kids have a brighter future? What gives you hope?
On the end of the Second World War, the Russian army, in two places stopped nations to kill each other. They were Serbs, Croats, and Poles and Ukrainians. We used to have bloody history in this part of Europe. For last 400 years, there were two ways to become national hero: to kill a lot of neighbors, or to be killed by neighbors. And suddenly we see 2 million of Ukrainians living at our home and saying, hey guys, if you will be in trouble, visit us. You will be safe. We will welcome you in Ukraine. We are not slaves of the history. This is not the situation that we are fixed. We are fixed with something. Definitely we'll have same neighbors. We Poles will not have Portuguese and people from Spain. Probably we'll have Germans, Ukrainians, Czechs, Slovaks, and so on. But we can change the history. This is experience of Poland, which successfully escaped from the Warsaw Pact and empire, and we did it intentionally. And this is experience of Poles and Ukrainians who built positive relationships, intentionally working together and respecting each other, even with that challenging past. It's positive.
To answer your question, if there is a future and whether it's only dark, the way I feel right now is that there is finally, in general, I feel that there is a future, because on 24th of August, it's going to be not only our 31st independence of Ukraine, And it feels a bit weird because I'm older now in independence. It feels, this kind of notion is still weird to me after 32 years. But it's also going to be 6 months of this war. And to be honest, I cannot convey to you how does it feel, and I never will want you to feel that. But on 21st of February, when I was leaving my home with my brother, his wife, and 5-year-old kid, and I felt that, okay, this is it. This is my biggest fear of all. We're going to live in occupation, and I will never be able to get back to Kyiv. Never again. Because when you see a 60 kilometers long line of tanks approaching your city, you're not a war expert, right? You don't understand that this is actually the easiest that can be for our army if they line their tanks in a line. But when you see that, you think that that's it. We are done, right? We will not have a country anymore. But after 6 months of this bloody war and of thousands of Ukrainians dead and 200 kids stolen from our country, regardless of all this hardship, we feel that there is actually a future, right? It's we are starting to believe and starting to have energy to create it, not only fight back Russians, but also think about our future. And I cannot agree more on Krzysztof. And I think that this is exactly the civic education in action. We had such a difficult history between Poland and Ukraine. And we don't have to go very back further. It's been like a few years ago, or 3 or 4 years ago, we were on the lowest of our relationship. It was really bad in terms of how do we see our history, how do we see various events. But now, the presidents, but they also channeled it to society. But now, I feel like I'm so glad to live in this historic moment to understand that we overstepped that, and we are more mature than our history, and we can do it. But also, I think we will only have a future, and just to build on what Krzysztof said, we will only have the future if the war crimes of communism are finally being punished. Because this war is happening exactly because of that. Because Russia remained a handshakable country, unlike to Nazi Germany that stopped being so, right? But war crimes of communism have been tolerated over years. They have been forgotten. They somehow gained absolutely different perspective. And this war is exactly what's happening again based on that. So I do hope that this is just another huge chance for the democratic Western world to name the things as they are, not to hide behind this UN rhetoric that this is a conflict, that this is something happening on the border between the countries. This is a war. This is a genocide against a nation, and this is a war against all of us, right? So the future will be there if we call things as they are and act accordingly.
And very short, because we need to end.
I'm okay. I will leave it there.
On that note, thank you all for coming.